Before we get into today's episode, I want to say something up front. This one is heavy. Heavier than Sam Shepard, heavier than Free Guard. We're talking about 33 confirmed victims, mostly young men, mostly from communities that weren't listened to when they reported people missing. That failure matters, and we're not going to gloss over it.
We mean that. The victims in this case deserve to be named and remembered as people, not just as numbers in a body count. We'll do our best to honor that today.
Okay, with that said, John Wayne Gacy was, by all outward appearances, a model citizen, a successful building contractor, a Democratic Party precinct captain, a man who threw enormous neighborhood barbecues and invited everyone on the street, a man who dressed as a clown and performed at children's birthday parties.
And underneath his house
in Norwood Park Township, Chicago, he had murdered 33 young men and boys and buried most of them in the crawl space.
Welcome to HILLarious Media. I'm Cindy.
I'm Dylan. Episode 15. And this one we've been building up to for a few weeks. Buckle up. John Wayne Gacy was born in Chicago in 1942. His childhood was not easy. His father was an alcoholic who was physically abusive and emotionally brutal. He regularly told Gacy he was stupid, that he'd never amount to anything, called him a mama's boy. Gacy had a heart condition as a kid that kept him out of sports and further alienated him from his father.
So, a classic difficult childhood.
Classic difficult childhood that does not excuse anything that comes later. Just context. As an adult, Gacy was determined to be everything his father said he couldn't be. He became genuinely successful. He managed a Kentucky Fried Chicken franchise in Iowa in the 1960s. He married, had 2 kids, was active in the Jaycees, a civic organization, and won awards for his community involvement.
He was good at the community stuff?
Exceptionally good. Charming, energetic, a natural organizer. People genuinely liked him. And then, in 1968, his first marriage fell apart when he was convicted of sexually assaulting a teenage boy who worked for him.
The first red flag that was not treated like a red flag.
The first massive red flag. He got 10 years, served 18 months, was paroled in 1970. His wife divorced him, he moved back to Chicago, moved in with his mother, and started a construction business called PDM Contractors.
And nobody in Chicago knew about the Iowa conviction?
This is one of the most important and frustrating parts of the whole story. Iowa did not flag the conviction to Illinois. There was essentially no information sharing between states. Gacy had a fresh start, a clean slate as far as his new community knew.
He started over.
And he rebuilt everything. Married again in 1972, a woman named Carol Hoff, who had 2 daughters. Started throwing those famous neighborhood barbecues, got involved in Democratic Party politics. He actually had his photo taken with First Lady Rosalind Carter in 1978, which became one of the most haunting photographs in American criminal history.
A photo with the First Lady in 1978.
In 1978, the same year he was arrested, and meanwhile, he had been killing people since 1972.
Okay, we have to talk about the clown. Gacy dressed as a clown at children's parties. He created a character called Pogo the Clown, did the full makeup and costume, and performed at neighborhood events in hospitals and birthday parties.
He made the costume himself. He was very proud of the costume.
And look, clowns are already doing a lot of heavy lifting in the cultural fear department, but this is the man who essentially cemented that fear for an entire generation.
He is single-handedly responsible for coulrophobia becoming a mainstream thing.
Coulrophobia being the fear of clowns for those playing at home. Dylan, how does a person compartmentalize like that? Like, how do you go from children's birthday party to what was happening under the house?
This is what forensic psychologists have spent decades trying to understand with Gacy. The consensus seems to be that the public persona, the contractor, the clown, the civic leader, wasn't entirely fake. He genuinely craved approval and community status. He genuinely enjoyed those roles. The violence existed in a completely separate compartment that he could seal off.
Which somehow makes it worse.
It makes it significantly worse, because it means there was no obvious tell, no darkness bleeding through. The neighbors who said he was a great guy weren't lying. That version of him was real too.
He even painted clown self-portraits from prison. He sold them. People bought them.
He was a prolific painter in prison. The clown paintings became famous and controversial. Some people found them genuinely disturbing as art objects. Others destroyed them publicly. Others collected them.
The art world is a strange place.
The art world is a very strange place. I want to spend real time on the victims because I think in a lot of true crime coverage, they become a statistic. 33, 33, 33, and the individual people get lost.
Agreed. Who were they?
Most of Gacy's victims were young men between their teens and mid-20s. Many were from working-class backgrounds. A significant number were runaways or young men who worked in the sex trade. Several were employees or contractors who worked for Gacy's construction business. He targeted people on the margins, people whose disappearances were less likely to be investigated aggressively.
And were the disappearances reported?
Many of them were. And this is where the systemic failure is absolutely damning. Time and again, when families, particularly families of young men from poorer backgrounds, young men who were gay, young men who were runaways, reported their loved ones missing, police did not treat it with urgency. The prevailing attitude was that young men who disappeared probably just moved on, probably didn't want to be found.
Which is a deeply dehumanizing assumption.
It's a dehumanizing assumption that cost lives. Because Gacy was active for 6 years before he was caught. 6 years during which multiple families were trying to get someone to listen.
Who were some of the individual victims we should name?
Timothy McCoy, who was 16. He was Gacy's first known victim in 1972. John Butkovich, 17, who worked for Gacy's company. His parents actually went to the police and reported him missing and told them Gacy was connected. Police visited Gacy, who talked his way out of it. Gregory Godzik, 17, Michael Bonin, 17, William Carroll, 16. These were children, Cindy.
They were children.
And there are 33 of them. And even after his arrest and conviction, 6 of his victims were never identified. We now know through DNA work that 4 have since been identified, but there are still individuals whose families may never have gotten answers.
That is an ongoing wound.
An ongoing wound. And I think it's important to say clearly, the length of time Gacy operated is not just a story about one evil man. It is a story about who society chose to protect and who it didn't. The young men he killed were not protected.
Okay, December 1978, what finally brings him down?
A 15-year-old boy named Robert Peast. He worked at a pharmacy near Gacy's home. On the 11th of December 1978, Robert told his mother he was going to talk to a contractor about a summer job. He never came home.
And his family reported it immediately?
Immediately. And crucially, Robert was a white teenager from a stable family in a suburban neighborhood. His disappearance was treated with urgency in a way that earlier disappearances had not been. Within days, police were looking at Gacy.
Which is its own uncomfortable truth.
A very uncomfortable truth that we should sit with for a moment. The investigation that finally caught Gacy was triggered by a disappearance that was taken seriously, partly because of who the victim was. That is a systemic injustice that runs through this entire case.
Acknowledged. So they start looking at Gacy.
They put him under surveillance, and almost immediately things don't add up. He's behaving erratically, there are odd smells coming from his house, he starts giving away his belongings. On the 21st of December, police execute a search warrant. They go into the crawl space.
And find
26 sets of remains. In the crawl space, under the house. 3 more victims had been thrown into the Des Plaines River because he'd run out of room.
He ran out of room.
He ran out of room in the crawl space. That sentence alone.
That sentence alone is one of the most horrifying things I've heard in 4 episodes of doing this.
Gacy was arrested on the 21st of December 1978. He confessed, he told police everything. He showed almost no remorse throughout the process. He was more concerned with logistics and detail than with the human cost of what he'd done.
He goes to trial in 1980. What's the defense strategy?
Insanity. The defense argued that Gacy had multiple personality disorder, that a separate personality called Jack was responsible for the murders, and that Gacy himself had no control over or memory of them.
Did the jury buy it?
The jury deliberated for 2 hours. 2 hours, Cindy, for a trial involving 33 murders. They came back with guilty on all counts.
2 hours.
They were not moved by Jack. Gacy was sentenced to death on all 12 counts of murder that carried the death penalty, the most death sentences handed to any individual in American history at that time.
And he sat on death row for 14 years.
14 years, during which he gave interviews, painted his clown pictures, maintained his innocence in some venues while having confessed in others, and became a macabre cultural figure. He was executed by lethal injection on the 10th of May, 1994.
His last words?
His last words were reportedly, "Kiss my ass," which is, I don't even know what to do with that.
That is an extraordinarily on-brand final statement for a man who never stopped being defiant.
Never stopped being defiant and never fully stopped performing. Even at the end, it was a performance.
I keep coming back to this systemic failure because the individual evil of John Wayne Gacy is horrifying. But the thing that keeps me up at night about this case is how many times someone tried to raise an alarm and wasn't heard.
John Butkovich's parents went to the police. Multiple families filed missing persons reports. The pattern was there if anyone had been looking for it across cases. The infrastructure to connect those dots didn't exist or wasn't being used.
Has that changed?
Partially. The Gacy case, along with a handful of other high-profile cases in the late 70s and early 80s, was actually a major driver behind the creation of the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children in 1984, and improved coordination between law enforcement agencies. The FBI's Behavioral Science Unit was also expanding and professionalizing during this period.
So, the policy response eventually happened.
Eventually, too late for 33 people. And the deeper issue, whose missing persons reports get treated urgently and whose don't, is something law enforcement agencies are still being called out on today.
It's worth saying that for anyone listening who has a loved one who has gone missing and isn't being taken seriously, there are organizations specifically designed to help advocate for those families. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children is one. We'll put links in the description.
Please do. Because part of why we cover these cases is because the pattern of who gets listened to and who doesn't isn't ancient history. It's ongoing.
Okay, the inevitable question with any serial killer case. Nature, nurture, or something else entirely?
I think with Gacy, the honest answer is we don't fully know and probably never will. The abusive childhood is real and documented. The sexual assault conviction in Iowa that was not flagged to Illinois is a systemic failure that enabled further harm. But the question of why some people with terrible childhoods become violent and most don't, that's still not answered.
I find myself less interested in the why of Gacy himself and more interested in the why of the systems around him. Why did Iowa not flag the conviction? Why did Chicago police not connect the missing persons dots earlier? Why were certain victims' families not listened to?
Those are the questions with actionable answers. The inside of Gacy's head is largely a dead end. The systems that failed around him are things we can actually examine and improve.
That feels like the right place to land on this one.
I think so too. John Wayne Gacy, convicted of 33 murders, executed 1994. A man whose public persona was so carefully constructed that his neighbors, his business associates, his political connections, none of them saw what was underneath.
And underneath were 33 people who deserved to come home. Timothy McCoy, John Butkovich, Darrell Sampson, Randall Reffett, Samuel Stapleton, Michael Bonin, William Carroll, James Mazzara, Gregory Godzik, John Shiz, John Prestige, Matthew Bowman, Robert Gilroy, John Mowry, Russell Nelson, Robert Winch, Tommy Bowling, David Cram, Frank Landingen, James Hawkinson, Rick Johnston, Ken Parker, Michael Rossi, Robert Peast, and the others, named and unnamed, who are part of this case.
We say their names.
We say their names.
Thank you for being here for episode 15. This was a hard one to make, and we hope we did it justice.
If you've been with us since episode 12, thank you. We've covered a lot of ground in 4 episodes, and we're not slowing down.
Subscribe, leave a review, send us your case suggestions. We read every one.
Links in the description for the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children and other resources we mentioned today.
I'm Dylan.
I'm Cindy.
Take care of yourselves out there.
And maybe don't hire a clown for your next birthday party.
Maybe just go with a magician.
A magician is fine.